So, Donald Trump racked up yet another endorsement from a non-traditional Republican, shall we say. Here's Tulsi Gabbard taking the stage and making her endorsement official for 2024.
Trump understands the grave responsibility that a president and commander-in-chief bears for every single one of our lives. Whether you're a soldier, you're an airman, a Marine, sailor, or a coastie, he keeps us in his heart in the decisions that he makes. We saw this through his first term in the presidency, when he not only didn't start any new wars, he took action to de-escalate and prevent wars. He exercised the courage that we expect from our commander-in-chief in exhausting all measures of diplomacy, having the courage to meet with adversaries, dictators, allies, and partners alike in the pursuit of peace, seeing war as a last resort. The truth is, as we head towards our decision as a country in November, the same cannot be said about Kamala Harris. In fact, the opposite is true, and we're living through this reality today as this administration has us facing multiple wars on multiple fronts and regions around the world, and closer to the brink of nuclear war than we ever have been before. This is one of the main reasons why I'm committed to doing all that I can to send President Trump back to the White House, where he can once again serve us as our commander-in-chief.
All right, so she goes on for a little more. We don't have to listen to all of that. Free Palestine, of course. Tulsi is yet another one whose, anti-war politics seems to end at around the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Yep. But this is a case study. I mean, just overall, Tulsi is really a case study, not just of the Democrats' charm offensive, but in sort of profiling how people outside the lines of what is permitted in terms of red team versus blue team get treated. And I'll let you know what I mean by that shortly. But let's just take a quick look back in time. Look at how much younger, without that Cruella de Vil white strip in her hair, there she is, March 29th.
She was in a whole different category of porn back then.
Yeah, right, exactly, yes. Yeah, whole different search tab. March 29th, 2016, this was when she quit the DNC to endorse Bernie Sanders. So she was not just a Democrat. She was potentially a rising star. I mean, she's the complete package, right? Yep. Woman of color, veteran. She was part of the DNC. She actually worked at the DNC.
Veteran.
Yeah, actually worked at the DNC. So she was part of their bench. I mean, she was someone who the Democratic establishment was pretty excited about. And that's when it started to all fall apart to the point where a few years later, obviously, we all remember this great piece of sound here. This is when she was running in the 2020 primary, and Hillary Clinton famously smeared her as a potential third-party candidate being groomed by the Russians.
Pushes her own Russia conspiracy theory. In a recent podcast, Clinton says Russians are grooming a 2020 presidential contender. That candidate is Tulsi Gabbard. Here's Hillary Clinton.
I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who's currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far. And that's assuming Jill Stein will give it up, which she might not, because she's also a Russian asset.
Okay, now turns out all of those predictions were totally wrong. And it's funny because now you have, some people on X are looking back at that and saying Hillary was right all along. Well, first, what the fuck are you talking about? First of all, Jill Stein.
She never ran as a third-party candidate.
She never ran as a third-party candidate.
She's not running third-party now.
She never ran as a third-party that year.
She was endorsing the Republican nominee.
And second, in 2020, Jill Stein did not run. They nominated Howie Hawkins that year. So Jill Stein did stand down, and she did not run as a third-party candidate. That doesn't matter. She was right all along because it's just a sideways across the bow smear. So that was in 2019.
And hey, just briefly, since you're touching on this, these are the norms and guardrails, people, right? So they're always saying, but her emails, she literally destroyed evidence under subpoena.
Oh, yeah.
I hate to tell you this, folks, but that is by definition against the law.
Right.
If you or I did it, we would go to jail. We'd be prosecuted. Whatever you think about the gravity of what was in those emails, she literally destroyed subpoenaed evidence. Literally.
Yes.
But if Trump had done that, oh my God, look at him. God knows what he was probably colluding with the Russians in those emails. Not to mention, you can all this shit about Russia. It's New York Times reporting, liberal rag in good standing. You can go look up the relationship of the Clintons and Russia in regards to uranium mines. If you put in those keywords or variations, I'm sure you'll get that article. It was very widely read.
Oh, yeah.
Or barring
that was widely read. Yes.
You can pick up Clinton Cash, which gets into the same matters.
Yes. No, that was very widely read. That got out there far and wide. So yeah, none of those predictions ended up being true, but Tulsi sealed her fate with the Democratic Party in 2016 when she quit the DNC. Then she ran against Bernie. She wasn't even running with Bernie, and they tried to smear her as a potential third-party candidate. So that, of course, led to her Dem exit in 2022. This was right before we first learned of Jose Vega because he cited this Dem exit piece in his first viral intervention against AOC. And that leads us to where we are now. That leads us to Tulsi Gabbard endorsing Trump. And so, look, with Tulsi, there is something about her that is just particularly sleazy because of the total about face on domestic policy. Like, look, if you were going to make the case, again, gun to your head, Trump is just more sort of by his nature averse to war, and so that is the anti-war vote. All right, I mean, you could get there in your brain, but Tulsi has gone from being a Bernie-style Democrat supporting Medicare for all to, recently calling, Build Back Better, an example of cradle-to-grave nanny statism, which, I mean, come on. At that point, you're just selling books, right?
Sure,
At that point,
sure.
like, you are a snake. You're the grifter that everybody warned that you were. But the reason I show you that timeline from DNC, future star within the Democratic Party to Bernie surrogates to Russian agent, according to Hillary Clinton, to Dem exiting to now endorsing Trump, it brought to mind something that we got into with Omali Yeshitela on the interview yesterday. We're going to play a clip of that interview as our next segment, but we asked him a really interesting question about Trump's relationship to the deep state, because one thing that the MAGA movements has in common with the African People's Socialist Party is they've both been Russiagated. And so I said, you're now facing trial on Russiagate charges. They Russiagated Trump. There's a ongoing debate about Trump's relationship to the permanent state and why they are so intent as smearing him as this other, mainly Russian, for the first 5 years. Why is that? And he gave a really interesting answer that I interpreted as, okay, the question, why does the deep state have such a hard-on for Trump? The answer all along is really they don't have a hard-on for Trump because he's Trump. They have a hard-on for Trump because he won. He made it into their living room and pissed on their rug. But anyone who tries to do that, they react the same way to. They did it to Bernie Sanders, saying his campaign was infiltrated by Russia. They did it to Tulsi Gabbard, right? On CNN, she goes on, she's being groomed by Russians to run as a third party, right? Like, anyone who's out of bounds is smeared as the other. And what is the other in
foreign agent.
Post-Cold War,
You're a foreign agent.
end of history, Western Hemisphere politics? It's Russian. You're Eastern, right? You are on the other team categorically. And so that's kind of an insight there. Like the course that they set her on is a course that they set Trump on, not because he's Trump, but just because he's not within the Mitt Romney, Barack Obama, Overton window. Neither is Tulsi, neither is Bernie, neither is Trump. So that's the answer right there. It really has nothing to do with who Trump is. It's a matter. It has more to do with where he got. If Tulsi caught fire and became president, they do the exact same thing to her. Bernie, they do the exact same thing to him.
Yeah, Tulsi is another example of something we've pointed out with some other figures who started out basically left of the Democratic Party establishment, who ultimately got pushed into conservative politics because they were so viciously attacked by the Democrats,
right?
That was where they had to go for protection. And ultimately, once you're living in somebody's house, you're going to start to adopt their ways. You're going to start to adopt their viewpoints. With Kennedy, look, he had heterodox views before, but he still saw himself as a Democrat.
Right.
And in a few short months, because of their lawfare, because of their anti-democratic practices, you've got him and their absolute unwillingness to listen to any of the points that he's raising. And we're not RFK stands by any means. We read his book. We critiqued some of it. We agreed with other things. And that's my point. There are things in there that are valuable and worthwhile. They won't listen to those either. They won't listen to any of it. It's gotten to the point that if you were going to be anti-establishment, and you don't want to be completely ruined, you kind of have to go over there for protection.
Right.
For protection,
exactly.
especially if you're a public figure. Who else is going to be there for you? And over time, once they get pushed over there, they start to adopt the views of more right-wing people, even on the economics, because these are your friends and your protectors and your patrons now, who are protecting you from the people who tried to destroy your life.
Exactly. And that is a huge part of what happened to Tulsi Gabbard. Now, without making too many excuses for her, she clearly has some, because look, even before she ran as this progressive with like an A rating on LGBT issues, that was the thing. They always tried to smear her because of her Hindu, nationalist upbringing. They always tried to smear her as some arch conservative on social issues, which she was not. Like I said, she had almost a perfect rating from LGBT groups and things like that on these social issues. So I don't think that that upbringing really affected her too much long term in terms of that issue set. Although now, like you said, because she's run into the arms of the right, who the fuck knows? But on a deeper level, certainly she's got a hang up about Muslims and Arabs, because even through all of this anti-war discourse that she traffics in, she is still hardcore pro-Israel. And that just makes no sense in any other context but to think, that Hindu nationalism she was raised with, maybe some of it rubbed off on her, but some of it didn't. Because that's the only way to explain this shit.
And this is something I think a lot of us were never aware of, that a kind of Zionism in Indian, specifically Hindu Indian society, is pretty common for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Well, we have our friend Sammy, who calls in.
We do, there.
Hindu Zionist and supporter of the show for whatever reason. We love you, Sammy. We appreciate it.
When I was in India, a group of Muslim men had been thrown off a train to their deaths because it was believed by the mob that threw them off that they were carrying beef with them, and they were not, but they were murdered. Like crazy shit like that goes down over there that we don't really hear about.
Yeah, that is a crazy story. But now, she is added now to the list of former Democrats for Trump. They did mention that they're going to be rolling out a list of former Democrat, actors, not necessarily all elected politicians like Tulsi Gabbard, but, RFK and the like. they're going to have a string of former Democrats come out and endorse Trump over the next week or two, leading into what may be the debate schedule. Now, Trump is blinking about that, but you could tell they're trying to pivot a little bit back towards a more populist issue set, a bit of a more populist message in the closing stretch of the campaign, which is obviously smart on their part. You'd much rather have RFK on the stump trail for you and someone like Tulsi on the stump trail for you than just sending Trump out there with a banner of Kamala Harris pretending she's an Indian or saying she's Indian over the top of the stage. They needed some sort of change in direction. And yeah, look, I mean, on balance, she is a plus for him, but I think her arc, yeah, that is a perfect example of driving an ally into the arms of your adversary, and they did it over the course of 8 years. It was pretty obvious where she would end up.
They did that with Elon.
Now it's official with Elon too.
Elon was a Silicon Valley lib. The guy owned an electric car company.
That's right. That's right. That's the big three. I almost, Elon now, I don't even think of him as a former Democrat, but he is. So that's the big three now is Elon, RFK, Tulsi. Yeah.
And Tulsi, I will just say, because I watched her speech, the full speech. Yeah, Trump made a big mistake not naming her VP. It would have undercut some of the white guys as far as the eye can see. That they don't even have to say it. I mean, it's just inherent in the ticket that he put together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I think in retrospect, you're right. I think the Vance pick made sense at the time because he was hot. He was hot. And it's a pick that if you're winning and you want to just tack
you
on
never want to get overconfident like that.
Well, I think it's also a function of it's overconfident in the sense that they kind of assumed that the trajectory of the race was already locked. And in that context,
why assume that this guy could have dropped dead any second?
Well, that's the thing.
Even without the coup.
That's what didn't make sense about it. Like, yeah, if you're winning, if you're up and JD Vance can barnstorm Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin and pad your lead by a point just to make sure you don't lose those states, all right, that makes sense in that context. But it doesn't account for a wild card like this, where now you're completely thrown off message and you're stuck with this, you're stuck with this weird guy, so to speak, who doesn't really bring anything to the ticket beyond, a sort of tack-on run. In a baseball game, they call it a tack-on run. You're already up 7-4. He can get you to 8-4 just to lock it down. That's the kind of pick that JD Vance was, and that turns out to be probably not what you'd be looking for in the context of a nail biter. In the context of a nail biter, you want someone who appeals to that middle, and Tulsi does. RFK does. All right, that's why it makes sense. I mean, if you're Trump, obviously you take the endorsement. That's more where you want to be right now as the Trump campaign than going around with JD Vance talking about how Kamala is an idiot, not black, and mocking childless women.
Yeah, I don't think Vance even brings that relative to Tulsi. I don't think he adds one thing that Tulsi would not have. And in spite of what people think, Republicans love opportunities to demonstrate that they're not really bigots, that it's ideological, that it's not racial, that it's not sexist. You give them an opportunity to line up a brown woman that they like for the presidency, who's a military woman, who's a veteran, they would jump at that.
That's why MAGA loved Vivek Ramaswamy. They love that guy. Yeah.
They would have loved that. There's not one person who likes JD Vance who would not have loved having Tulsi on that ticket.
Please clap.